That shirt is a violation, Naomi. Glenvale won't tolerate pregnant women exposing themselves like this. Sareth Vaughn snapped, her voice slicing through the greenhouse air as she lifted her HOA badge like it was divine law. And I will enforce it. I barely had time to turn before her fingers clamped the corner of Naomi's lavender maternity wrap and ripped it open across her stomach. The tear echoed, loud, violent, humiliating. The entire path fell silent. Neighbors froze mid-step. A child dropped a watering can. Even the wind stopped against the glass walls. But I didn't. "Step away from my wife," I said, my voice low enough to shake the leaves. "You just tore regulated medical fabric, and that rip isn't an accident. I can prove it." Sareth blinked, her hand suspended in the air like she didn't expect the shirt to actually tear. She expected compliance, fear, not resistance. Her smug little laminated badge, Sareth Vaughn, acting HOA president, gleamed like it approved the assault. If you're watching this because you think HOA rules can't ruin lives, hit subscribe right now. What happened next will make you rethink every friendly neighborhood guideline you've ever signed. I'm Dorian Kesh, forensic textile chemist. My work appears in courtrooms, depositions, and regulatory hearings. I testify about how fabric tears, direction, force, intent. I can tell whether a collar was pulled in anger or fabric failed from age. I analyze trauma in uniforms from law enforcement and hospital teams. My findings have overturned wrongful accusations and exposed real misconduct. But none of that training prepared me for the sight of my wife, Naomi, standing there with her belly exposed, her surgical scar visible beneath the fetal monitor strapped to her skin. And the worst part? She didn't even cover herself. She just whispered, "Not again," under her breath. 6 losses, 6. We buried hope so many times we started to forget what it felt like to dream. Pregnancy number 7 was the miracle, an unsteady, fragile miracle we guarded like treasure. 7 months in, every breath she took was monitored. Every step was cautious. Every loud noise made her jump. And Sareth, our overzealous self-appointed enforcer of Glenvale's visual purity, decided Naomi's maternity wrap was a threat. Not noise, not clutter, not trash cans left out. A pregnant woman's shirt. Naomi's wrap wasn't even decorative. It was soft carbon blend cotton with medical padding, recommended by her OB to avoid friction against her monitor. And now it dangled in tatters, edges curling where Sareth's fingers had dug in. I stepped between them, blocking Naomi from the gawking neighbors. I took my jacket off and wrapped it around her shoulders. She clutched the collar with trembling hands. I felt her breath stutter against my arm. Too fast, too shallow. Stress contractions were always a risk. My eyes lifted to the small bronze dome camera, mounted above the irrigation shed. The HOA installed it last year, bragging about enhanced community watch. What Sareth didn't know was that I once consulted for the manufacturer during a firmware overhaul. I left a diagnostic script inside the early models, and never disabled my back-end access. That camera was still sending footage to me. Every frame of this assault, captured. I looked back at Sareth. She wasn't triumphant anymore. She was calculating. Her eyes darted to the torn fabric, to the monitor on Naomi's belly, to the stunned neighbors who, moments earlier, hung on her every rule. "This is an ADA violation," I said, "and a breach of state medical privacy. You just exposed a high-risk pregnancy in public. You don't have jurisdiction to touch anyone. You sure as hell don't have jurisdiction to tear clothing." Sareth opened her mouth, but nothing came out. She'd crossed a line she didn't understand. A line that didn't care about color palettes or lawn heights or visual serenity mandates. A line enforced not by neighborhood gossip, but by law. Naomi whispered, "Dorian, please, she can't get near me again." "She won't," I said, my voice steady. The same tone I use when testifying under oath. Then I tapped the tiny fob clipped inside my pocket. A red light blinked. The wind chime on our porch, the one made from Naomi's childhood violin strings, had a microcam inside. And because stress kept her at home most days, she asked me to sync it with our safety system. It caught more than she knew. It caught everything. "Where are you watching from? Because after today, you'll think twice before trusting anyone with a badge, especially when that badge says OA. Naomi didn't speak again until we were in the car. Even then, her words were thin, caught somewhere between breath and memory. "She really ripped it," she said quietly, fingers fidgeting at the edge of my jacket, now draped over her shoulders. Like it was just fabric, like I was just something messy on her street. I didn't answer. My hands were firm on the wheel, but my mind was locked on the sound, that sharp fabric split. I'd heard it 1,000 times in lab recordings, courtroom evidence, slow-motion captures of struggle or escape. But this time, it was my wife, and that changed everything. Glenvale Summit was supposed to be safe, quiet. We moved here after pregnancy number 5 failed because we thought the clean air and watchful community would offer us a different kind of peace. What we didn't understand was that watchful meant surveillance. Quiet meant control, and Sareth Vaughn had turned neighborhood leadership into her personal theater of domination. The same woman who lectured about holiday wreath diameters had now forcibly exposed a pregnant woman's abdomen in public, and no one said a word. Not the landscaper walking by, not the mother pushing a stroller, not even the HOA treasurer. Callum Drone, who stood just 30 feet away and stared at his clipboard like it might shield him. I parked in our driveway and helped Naomi inside. Her steps were careful, each one deliberate. She stopped at the porch and looked at the wind chime. "I want it back up," she said. I didn't argue. I reached into the storage bench, retrieved the quiet bell, and rehung it under the eaves. The soft tones sang out instantly, a mix of recycled violin strings and tiny ceramic bells she made after loss number 4. That sound had once calmed her between panic attacks. It still did. As she sat on the porch swing, cradling her stomach, I stepped inside and pulled up my digital archive. I logged the incident with timestamp, coordinates, and frame identifiers. Every movement Sareth made, reaching, grabbing, tearing, had been captured from 3 angles. Camera 1, HOA Greenhouse Dome, cam. Camera 2, My Porch Bell micro lens. Camera 3, Naomi's fetal monitor sync dash. I didn't need speculation. I had proof. But it wasn't just what Sareth did that disturbed me. It was the silence, that terrifying quiet from people who saw injustice but chose not to speak. Naomi's rap had no slogans, no protest signs, no banned colors. It wasn't a challenge to authority. It was a woman trying to breathe through her pregnancy without rubbing her scar raw. And Sareth had framed it as a threat to neighborhood integrity. I pulled up the list of citations we'd received in the past 2 months, 9 in total, all related to visual standards. 4 were targeted at Naomi's pregnancy wear, 2 for porch color anomalies, 1 for the unauthorized thematic presence of her handmade wind chime. But I remembered something else. Each citation was delivered, not mailed, and each one had Sareth's signature. Even the ones with digital timestamps that should have required a full board vote, which meant she was either forging approvals or abusing emergency clause privileges. And I had the violation slips to prove it. The door creaked open behind me. Naomi stood there, back straight. "Callum saw everything," she said. I turned. "You sure?" He was holding the clipboard. He looked at me when it happened, then down at the paper. He didn't even flinch. That name had been circling my mind since we got back. Callum Drone, treasurer, former military analyst. The man who always walked slowly and signed quickly. Too careful to approve that many violations unless something or someone was pressuring him. I opened the community member portal and scanned the bylaws. To file that many citations without board approval, Sareth would have had to invoke Section 14D, Emergency Code Enforcement, reserved for situations where immediate visual disruption threatened neighborhood security or property values. A pregnant woman's shirt didn't qualify, not unless she was twisting the language and twisting Callum's arm. I sat back in my chair and stared at the still image of Sareth's hand on Naomi's torn wrap. The camera caught more than a violation. It caught a lie. And now I needed to find out how many more she'd told and who she made complicit along the way. The silence from our neighbors wasn't just fear, it was survival. But I wasn't interested in survival anymore. I wanted truth, and I wanted Sareth's badge. Callum Drone shuffled toward our house just after 8 the next morning, his shoes crunching lightly over the dewy gravel walk that curved around the community mailbox cluster. He wasn't in uniform, no clipboard, no HOA name tag, just khakis, a zipped vest, and a man who looked like he hadn't slept. Naomi saw him first through the side window. "He's coming," she said softly. I stepped out before he could knock. He froze halfway up the porch. "Morning," he mumbled, voice barely above the wind. Callum. His hands fidgeted near his waistline, like he was adjusting a holster that wasn't there. The military discipline still clung to his spine, but something in his face had cracked, a tension I hadn't seen before. His eyes flicked toward the wind chime, then back to me. "I wasn't supposed to bring this yet," he said, holding out a sealed HOA citation envelope. "For what?" I asked flatly, not moving to take it. He didn't answer. I stepped closer. "Was this from the board?" He swallowed. Technically, it was pushed through under emergency discretion. His words were practiced, rehearsed, like reading from the manual, but his tone betrayed him, hollow, guilty. "Emergency discretion," I repeated. "For what? Unauthorized abdominal fabric?" He winced. "I didn't approve it." "She said you did." Callum's silence said everything. "I saw your initials on the violation last month," I added, "and the one before that." "I didn't sign those," he said quickly. "At least, not as they were filed." That stopped me. She's been reusing digital templates. I'd sign a blank enforcement form during meetings, and she'd populate the details later. Said it saved time. I didn't realize she was targeting my wife? He closed his eyes. "I didn't know it was going that far." I said nothing. He lowered the envelope like it weighed more than it should have. "She's got the others scared, Dorian. Anyone who pushes back gets reviewed for non-compliance, landscaping violations, noise audits, utility report requests. I got hit with a water usage check the day after I asked about a bylaw revision." "You're the treasurer." "I know." His voice cracked for the first time. "And I've let this happen too long." We stood in the silence for a moment. Naomi watched from the window, not moving, just listening. "I didn't speak up yesterday," Callum said. "I should have. But when I saw her rip that wrap..." His voice broke off. He looked at the torn fabric Naomi had folded over the back porch railing to dry. The monitor wires had been removed, but the tear was still there, curling at the edges, exposing the stretch stitching meant to protect her scar. "She went too far," he said finally. "I'm filing with DOPL," I said. "Her license gives me a legal path, not through the HOA, not through the community, through state oversight." Callum nodded slowly. "She doesn't know how deep you can go, does she?" "She will." He hesitated. "There's something else." I waited. "She's trying to draft a new visual conformity clause for the spring policy update," he said. "It'll give her permanent emergency discretion for anything involving unmodeled bodily outlines and atypical fabric silhouettes. The language is vague enough to apply to anyone. Pregnant women," I said. He nodded once. "She claims it's to maintain psychological street harmony." That's her phrase. That phrase triggered something in me. I remembered it. Naomi's second violation used that exact wording, and that violation, filed 2 days after Sareth personally spotted Naomi walking to the shared compost bin, was the one that got our decorative planters removed. "You still have board access?" Callum looked around, then nodded. "I need everything," I said. "Any email with that phrase, any draft revision. If she's building a policy that legalizes assault disguised as HOA code, I'm stopping it before she prints the next agenda." He nodded again, slower this time, and handed me the envelope anyway. "I didn't approve this one either," he said, "but you should see what she wrote." He walked away without another word. I opened the citation right there on the porch. Violation 1134B, improper fabric conduct, pregnancy garment display. Filed under Emergency Visual Disruption Clause. Submitted by Sareth Vaughn, Acting President. Digitally co-signed Callum Drone, Treasurer. My jaw locked. Naomi stepped outside and joined me. She read the heading over my shoulder, silent. "She forged another one," I said. Naomi didn't flinch. She just looked toward the quiet bell wind chime, swaying in the breeze. The ceramic notes rang out softly. "Then you do what you do best," she said. "You prove it." I didn't sleep that night, not really. I stayed up cataloging every violation Sareth had filed against us since we moved into Glenvale. The timestamps, the language, the vague legal phrasing she loved to repeat like a spell, visual disruption, ambient inconsistency, non-standard outline. I read each one until the words stopped meaning anything, until my eyes started to scan, not for content, but for patterns. Because I wasn't building a complaint anymore, I was building a case. At exactly 6:41 a.m., while Naomi was still resting with her monitor charging beside the bed, I uploaded the footage from our porch bell camera onto a secure drive. Every frame of Sareth's, hand on the wrap, every still image of Naomi frozen in place, every flinch, every neighbor turning away. Then I organized the 9 citations in chronological order and compared them against HOA board meeting logs. That's where the discrepancies started to pile up. Violation number 4, allegedly filed after a board vote, had no record of discussion in the official minutes. Violation number 6 was time-stamped on a day when the board secretary had noted Sareth was absent. Violation number 9, the one Callum dropped off yesterday, had a digital signature marked approved by board majority, but the metadata showed only one login, hers. And tucked inside the spring draft bylaws, a document Sareth had uploaded to the internal portal at 2:11 a.m. 2 weeks ago, was a line that stopped me cold. Clause 5.3b. Emergency discretion may be exercised by acting officers in response to any display of visual instability, including, but not limited to, atypical human body configurations, organic silhouettes, non-conforming garments, or amplified physiological states deemed disruptive. Amplified physiological states. I stared at the words like they were poison. She wasn't just rewriting the rules. She was trying to institutionalize the harassment. I downloaded the full bylaw draft and saved a local backup. Then I ran a text string comparison against prior policy documents archived on the HOA site. That clause, completely new, inserted without a board vote, no signature, no discussion, just an upload and a quiet rollout set for spring vote review. It hadn't passed yet, but it was sitting there, waiting. At 8:15, I walked down to the community notice board near the fitness center. 2 new violation slips were already taped up, one for a teenager who'd spray painted their skateboard, another for a couple who installed solar lights without prior form submission. Sareth's signature was on both. The board beside it had the agenda for the next open HOA meeting, no mention of bylaw revisions. She was hoping no one would notice, that no one would care, that no one would connect words like atypical or non-conforming to real people, people like Naomi. I stepped into the breezeway between the gym and the pool and made the call. Department of Occupational and Professional Licensing, the voice answered. How can I direct your call? I gave them Sareth's full name, license number, and the nature of my complaint, unauthorized use of regulatory power, potential ADA violation, and deliberate public exposure of private medical equipment during a non-consensual physical interaction. Then I mentioned my profession, my credentials, my archive, my evidence. The tone on the other end changed immediately. They gave me an email address, a case number, the name of the intake investigator, Elaine Richter. I was told to expect follow-up by the end of the week. On the way home, I passed by Sareth's house. Her car wasn't there, but her porch lights were already on, and a fresh HOA flyer sat tucked in each of her neighbors' mailboxes. Her control wasn't just through enforcement, it was through presence. She was always around, always watching, always one step ahead. That's why no one challenged her. That's why even Callum had kept quiet until she forged one too many signatures. But now, the people she silenced were becoming evidence. When I got back, Naomi was sitting on the porch with a blanket across her legs. She held a notebook in her lap, our baby names list, and her finger hovered near one entry. I sat beside her without a word. After a long moment, she looked at me. You filed it, didn't you? I nodded, and for the first time in 2 days, she closed her eyes and smiled. Just a little, just enough. It started with the sound of ceramic hitting wood. I looked up from my laptop just in time to see the wind chime sway hard to the right, one of the violin string arms smacking against the post. A gust of wind? No. The morning was still. I stepped outside. The quiet bell was spinning, too forcefully. Someone had been there. Naomi stood at the end of the path, one hand gently resting over her stomach. She was staring at the spot beneath the wind chime. Her face was unreadable, but her voice was calm when she spoke. She was here again. I followed her gaze and saw it, half a footprint in the soil. The edge of our planter had been nudged. I crouched, examined the disturbed dirt, then glanced up at the camera embedded behind the ceramic shell. The red indicator blinked once. Recording triggered. Back inside, I pulled the footage immediately. A narrow field of view, low light from the early dawn, but it caught her. Sareth. She'd stepped onto our porch at 5:42 a.m., stood beneath the chime, and raised her phone toward it like she was filming. Then, without hesitation, she reached out and tried to twist the base off the hook. When it wouldn't budge, she smacked it, hard, then walked away. Her face was calm the whole time. She didn't look around, didn't hesitate, didn't care if she was caught. She thought she was untouchable. I clipped the footage, time-stamped it, and dropped it into the evidence folder under tampering, attempted removal of private surveillance device. That made 3 major incidents in 72 hours. The shirt rip, the forged citation, and now deliberate interference with security property during an open investigation. And I hadn't even submitted the fabric report yet. I went to my workshop in the back room, pulled Naomi's torn wrap from its flat tray, and began the analysis. The weft of the cotton was consistent. No dry rot, no weak fibers. The tear moved against the direction of weave, diagonally across the body. I placed the fabric beneath the polarized light scope and checked tension distortion. High stress strain, no fray, no rolling, a clean directional force. I photographed the entry point where Sareth's fingers had gripped the corner, still, faintly wrinkled. From there, the tear traveled through the pregnancy-safe carbon padding and out through the bottom seam. The sensor contact points were intact, which meant Naomi's monitor stayed active, but the cloth had failed entirely under a sudden, deliberate force. I labeled the file TE003, cataloged every angle, and cross-referenced it with prior cases I'd submitted for law enforcement clients. That alone wouldn't be enough, so I cross-matched the garment's order specs from the medical supplier. It was FDA listed as a Class 1 protective maternity wrap, certified under Utah State Health Exception 402B, meaning legally treated as a medical aid when used during documented pregnancies. If someone damaged it, especially publicly, it was no longer property damage. It was interference with medical equipment. I printed that certification, highlighted the clause, and included it in the folder now growing thicker by the hour. The next step was subtle, but necessary. I logged into the HOA portal under my resident account and reviewed our violation history. The citation Sareth forged using Callum's name had been marked Board Approved, but the approval field showed only a single entry, her account, 15 minutes before the timestamp. I recorded a screen capture video of the discrepancy showing the digital signature inconsistency. Then I navigated to the document archive and searched for keywords: visual disruption, physiological amplification, non-conforming textile. She'd used those words at least a dozen times over the past 6 months in various notices, not just to us, but to 2 other families. One had since moved. The other had removed their ramp installation without protest. The patterns were there, a trail of discomfort masked as governance. I printed everything and labeled the folder Pattern of Targeting, Glenvale Summit HOA. Naomi watched me from the living room, her eyes following each movement like she already knew what it meant. "Do we have enough?" she asked softly. I didn't answer right away. I walked over, handed her the fabric sample sealed in its plastic, and knelt beside the couch. "You tell me," I said. "This is your proof." She turned the sample in her hand and nodded. "Then yes, we have enough." And for the first time, it felt like the house wasn't just a place to hide. It was becoming a witness. By noon, the neighborhood had started whispering. 3 houses down, the Delvers recycling bin was overturned and left that way. Across the street, Mrs. Vene had removed every single porch planter, just vanished overnight. Even the Guzmans, who never talked to anyone, had taken down their rainbow flag. Fear moved faster than truth ever could. Sareth was making examples. The new violation she taped to our door didn't bother with subtlety. In bold, underlined letters, final warning, repeated disregard for visual compliance. A copy had already been emailed. She was laying the groundwork to push for a board-reviewed fine. Except this time, she didn't include Callum's forged co-signature. She didn't need to. She wanted us to know it was just her. Naomi stared at the notice from the porch swing, her arms folded tight around the light blue wrap she had layered under a zip-up sweater. She hadn't left the property since the incident. Every step she took was measured. Every breath was guarded. I stood next to her, holding the evidence folder like a loaded weapon. "I'm going to submit it all today," I said. Naomi didn't blink. "To the licensing board and the state civil rights office," I replied. "This isn't just misuse of professional authority anymore. This is targeted harassment based on medical condition." She nodded slowly. "She'll retaliate." "She already is." I pulled out the latest draft of the report. The structure was clear. Exhibit log, forensic textile analysis, digital evidence, footage stills, violation history, the attempted removal of the wind chime camera, and a legal addendum citing the ADA and Utah Health Protection clauses. Each section was clean, precise, no emotion, just facts sharpened into legal teeth. But I knew Sareth. Facts alone wouldn't break her. I needed something louder, something she couldn't silence with another passive-aggressive violation to slip, or by making her victims disappear from the community one at a time. So, I added the one thing she couldn't dismiss: a certified letter of complaint to the Utah Department of Real Estate Enforcement Division, signed with my full credentials under penalty of perjury, detailing how Sareth Vaughn, a licensed property manager, was using her status to intimidate, harass, and physically endanger residents under the false guise of HOA compliance. I sealed the envelope. When I walked outside to drop it at the priority box down the street, I saw Callum standing near the open-air bike rack. He wasn't alone. Marla Kincaid, the HOA secretary, was next to him, speaking in low, clipped tones. When she spotted me, she tensed. He didn't. I waited until she walked off before approaching. "She knows I gave you the draft," he said without preamble. "She guess or no?" "She pulled me into a side meeting," he replied. "Asked me if I was feeling pressured by anyone in the community to disclose internal documents." Her exact words? "Pressured into disloyalty." He met my eyes. "She's panicking. She'll move fast now." I handed him a copy of the forensic analysis, the one with the tear pattern and high-tension strain markers. "If she accelerates her attack, we hit back before she builds momentum. You said she's drafting new bylaw language for spring?" Callum nodded. "It's not filed for vote yet, but she's lobbying behind closed doors, claims she's creating stability standards to reduce community psychological friction. She's codifying discrimination." "She's trying," he said, glancing around. "But if this becomes a state-level audit, it already has." He nodded, lips pressed tight. "She took everything from my wife," I added, voice dropping. "Her peace, her trust, her safety. I'm not letting that stand." Callum didn't argue. He simply pulled a key from his pocket and handed it to me. "This opens the back door to the HOA's records annex," he said. "I won't risk logging in remotely, but if you want physical copies before she purges anything..." I stared at the key. "No basement raids," I said. He half smiled. "It's not a basement. It's a file cabinet in a maintenance room. And she's not careful. She thinks no one would ever cross her like this." He turned and walked off before I could respond. I looked down at the key. I wouldn't use it, but I'd hold on to it, just in case. Back at home, Naomi had gone inside to rest. The porch was still. The wind chime moved faintly, but not from wind. I sat beneath it, evidence folder in my lap, and listened to its soft clinks counting down the time until Sareth's shield cracked. Today, I wasn't just responding. Callum came back after dark. No knock, no call, just a quiet figure walking up our driveway with his shoulders hunched like he was carrying something heavier than the folder tucked under his arm. Naomi was asleep on the couch, the fetal monitor blinking in a slow rhythm beside her. I opened the door before he could lift his hand to knock. "She's rewriting everything," he said, stepping inside without waiting for permission. "Not just future bylaws. She's altering past meeting records, scrubbing vote logs. It's happening now." He handed me the folder. Inside were 6 pages, printouts of internal HOA records, each marked with meeting dates from the last 3 months. I recognized 2 of them immediately. They were the same meetings Sareth claimed had approved the violations against Naomi. But now, the voting columns had been modified. Her name appeared in every yes box. The other board members were marked absent or undecided. Except, I remembered those meetings. Marla Kincaid had been present. So had Callum. These aren't just fabrications, I said. They're revisionist fiction. He pulled another sheet from his coat. This one wasn't from a meeting. It was an email, printed, dated 5 days ago, sent from Sareth's personal address to the HOA board alias. We must tighten narrative cohesion ahead of any external review. Any board member who challenges this approach should consider their future position untenable. Narrative cohesion. It wasn't about truth, it was about optics. Control. She's preparing for fallout, I muttered. She suspects someone filed something outside the neighborhood, Callum confirmed. She doesn't know it was you, not yet. Won't take her long, he nodded. Which is why I brought this too. From his back pocket, he pulled a second document, a signed letter. His own statement. I, Callum Drone, acting treasurer of the Glenvale Summit HOA, affirm that the following citations were not reviewed or voted on by the board, nor were they lawfully enacted under procedural compliance. He listed them, all 9, including the one Sareth used to justify ripping Naomi's wrap. I looked up. You're submitting this to the state? He shook his head. No, you are. He slid a flash drive across the table. Everything on that drive matches what's in those folders. I copied the original database last week before she started changing entries. You'll find timestamp logs, unedited minutes, and the version history that proves which files she altered and when. I didn't speak. Because this was the tipping point. I had footage, fabric evidence, patterned citations, and now the first signed testimony from within her own board, a whistleblower. You realize she'll know it was you the moment this goes in, I said. I do. She could retaliate, legally, financially. She already is, he said, voice suddenly hard. You think you were the only ones? My niece moved in last year, adopted, biracial. She was cited twice for sitting on the front lawn after dark because her presence disrupted the visual peace. He met my eyes, and I saw the reason he had finally stepped out of the shadows. She humiliated a pregnant woman in public, and no one said a word, including me, but that ends now. I nodded once, took the flash drive, and slid it into the evidence folder. It clicked into place like a final puzzle piece, neat, unshakable. Did anyone else see you take these? No. Good. Keep it that way. If she tries to corner you, she won't. I believed him. The man who once flinched when delivering citations now stood taller, not defiant, but resolved. We stood in silence for a long moment. Then he left, without another word. I returned to the living room, sat beside Naomi, and watched her sleep for a moment. Her breathing was steady, peaceful, the way it hadn't been in days. On the table beside me sat a box labeled Glenvale, Misconduct Evidence, Vaughn, S., Active. I placed Callum's folder on top and locked the lid. The next move belonged to me. But the damage Sareth had done, that belonged to all of us. And I had the proof now, not just in files and fibers, but in people. One by one, they were stepping out of the silence. And silence had always been Sareth's strongest weapon. Until now. By morning, my war room wasn't a room anymore. It was the whole dining table. Stacks of labeled folders, digital backups on 2 encrypted drives, forensic photos, citation logs, whistleblower testimony, and now, the version history of the Glenvale record system. My laptop sat at the center like a command node. Naomi watched me from the kitchen, tea in hand, silent but grounded. I wasn't just reacting now. I was building forward. Every minute Sareth spent rewriting history, I was solidifying it. I finalized the complaint letter to DOPL, a new version, cleaner, and backed with the documents Callum had delivered. The timeline alone stretched 6 pages. Every violation, every meeting mismatch, every moment Sareth had abused the authority her license gave her. But one section needed more than legal weight, the terror report. I pulled Naomi's maternity wrap from its protective sleeve, ran a final scan under the scope, and took one last set of magnified photos. The rip path was unmistakable, force applied at a perpendicular angle, against the grain, with compression points along the hem. Deliberate, not accidental, not wear and tear. I paired the images with side-by-side comparisons from other forensic cases I'd worked, anonymized but admissible. Then I added the medical context, the product description from the FDA site, The manufacturer's note about high-risk pregnancy use, the copy of Naomi's prescription, and a sworn statement I had Naomi sign, just one paragraph outlining the necessity of the garment for fetal monitoring. She didn't hesitate. Once that was scanned and attached, I drafted my own affidavit. I listed my credentials, state license number, forensic certifications, and past involvement in litigation testimony. I didn't inflate anything. I didn't need to. My profession was about clarity, objectivity, truth under scrutiny, and this truth was sharp enough to cut through any HOA defense. The last file I added was the footage from the wind chime. Sareth's hand, reaching, her knuckles flexing, the split-second jerk, the snap, Naomi's exposed stomach, the monitor, still blinking, and the silence that followed. I hit render on the full archive and prepared the package for submission, both digitally and as a printed binder with a signed courier release. But this wasn't just about filing complaints anymore. This was about protecting Naomi until it was over. So I opened a second project folder, one labeled Public Strategy. If Sareth tried to discredit us in the next HOA meeting, we needed witnesses, allies, momentum. I began drafting a letter to select residents, those I'd seen her target before, the Guzmans, Mrs. Vanny, the couple with the solar lights. I wrote carefully, without accusation, just enough to let them know, she's being investigated, and if you've experienced anything similar, you are not alone. The wording mattered. I wasn't asking them to fight, just to know, and maybe to stop hiding. I finished the first round of letters and sealed them by hand. Naomi sat down beside me, watching the pile grow. "Do you think they'll respond?" she asked. "I don't know," I said, "but they deserve the chance to choose." We had been living under a system of intimidation, the kind that looked clean from the outside, neat lawns, fresh paint, polite emails. But the rules were twisted in quiet ways. Naomi's pregnancy had become a violation. A family's ramp had become a hazard. A kid's art had become graffiti. And each time someone didn't speak up, Sareth grew stronger, until now. I loaded the binder into a lockable courier case, double-checked the tracking forms, and sent it out before noon. Certified overnight delivery to DOPL's intake division. Attention, Elaine Richter. As I watched the truck disappear down Glenvale's main road, I felt the pressure shift, like the weight had started to move off my shoulders and onto someone else's. Not gone, but transferred. Back inside, Naomi stood at the window. Her tea had gone cold in her hand. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. We both knew something had changed. We weren't cornered anymore. Now we were positioned. The wind was stronger that morning, snapping through the pines behind our backyard like it had a message to deliver. Naomi sat curled on the porch swing in a layered robe, one hand cradling her stomach, the other cupped around her tea. I was inside, running final checks on the submission files before backup upload. 2 identical encrypted drives, one set to auto-upload to cloud in 4 hours, the other to be couriered to DOPL if anything disrupted the first. Everything was in place, every citation, every photo, every fabric scan, every digital signature log, every contradictory board minute, Callum's affidavit, the video, the tear. And now, the list of community members Sareth had cited for minor or subjective visual non-compliance in the last 9 months. I had verified 6 instances where she had issued fines under emergency discretion, without even informing the board. 4 of them were resolved quietly. Residents paid out of fear. 2 moved. None of them had spoken up. But I would. At exactly 11 a.m., I clicked Submit on the full report. It was routed to 3 divisions: the Utah Department of Occupational and Professional Licensing, the State Civil Rights Office, and the local Real Estate Regulatory Board. It wasn't just an HOA complaint anymore. It was a multi-agency misconduct case, backed by verifiable evidence and expert affidavit. I sat back and stared at the screen, waiting for the confirmation code to appear. It did. Case ID. Vaughn 1023. Me. I exhaled for the first time in what felt like a week, but we weren't done. I still had one more step to take before Sareth made her next move. I pulled out the stack of printed letters Naomi and I had sealed, personalized notes to the residents who'd been cited or bullied into silence. Not an attack, just a gentle line in the sand. She's being investigated. You're not alone. If you've experienced anything similar, here's a private inbox where you can safely respond. I walked door to door across Glenvale, placing them carefully into mail slots, under welcome mats, between screen doors. I didn't knock, I didn't wait, but I saw them watching. Behind curtains, between blinds, quiet glances, silent, uncertain, curious. Not ready to speak, but aware now. At the corner house near the slope, Mrs. Venny's front door opened as I turned back onto the sidewalk. She didn't step out, just stood in the doorway in her robe, staring at the envelope on her welcome mat. Our eyes met for less than a second. She nodded, then she closed the door. By the time I returned home, Naomi was sitting upright, her phone in her lap. "I got a message," she said, "from someone I don't know. Said her name's Carla Danner. She used to live here. Said she was forced out last year." My jaw tightened. What did she say? Naomi handed me the phone. It was a simple message. I saw the footage. I still have my citation from Sareth. I'm ready to give a statement if needed. I'm sorry I left without fighting, but I'm glad someone stayed. That was all I needed to hear. I added Carla's name to the growing witness list. 2 other messages came in within the next hour, one anonymous, one signed only with initials. Both claimed Sareth had issued citations over bodily outline rules, one for postpartum clothing, one for a child's medical compression vest. The pattern was loud now, and with every ping of that inbox, Sareth's armor cracked just a little more. At dusk, Naomi and I sat outside again. The wind chime whispered in lazy arcs overhead. "You look different," she said, not looking at me. "How?" "Like you're not bracing anymore." I nodded. She wasn't wrong. "Because now," I said, "I'm not playing defense." The wind moved again, this time gentler. Like it agreed. The Glenvale Community Hall looked like it always did. Too clean, too polished, too bright under the clinical LED panels overhead. The folding chairs were lined in tight, controlling rows, and a plastic sign taped to the podium read, "Monthly HOA Compliance Review, by invitation only." But half the neighborhood was already there. I took a seat near the back, binder in hand, evidence drive in my jacket. Naomi stayed home. We'd talked it over. She didn't need to be in the room where they had once decided, without consent, that her body violated the view. Callum arrived late, slipped into a side seat, and didn't acknowledge me directly, but I saw the smallest nod. He had done his part. Now it was time for mine. At exactly 6:02 p.m., Sareth entered. She wore slate gray today. No name badge, no clipboard, just presence. Calculated, sharp-eyed, confident. The way she walked told me she still believed this room was hers. She opened the meeting with her usual affected warmth. "Thank you everyone for coming. Tonight's compliance review will cover a handful of recent disruptions and proposed amendments to our visual continuity code." No one spoke, not even the board members flanking her, Marla on one side and a new face on the other. Someone she'd pulled in recently. Temporary, most likely. Anne, ally who wouldn't ask questions. Sareth tapped her notes and began with minor infractions. Flag placement, mulch border expansion, one family's mailbox paint being non-neutral. Then her eyes flicked to the back of the room, right to me. "And lastly," she said, "we must address the matter of targeted destabilization attempts within our community, including mischaracterizations of board conduct and fabricated citations distributed outside approved channels." That was her first swing. She didn't name me. She didn't have to. Murmurs stirred, some curious, some tense. I stood. "I'd like to speak." Sareth raised an eyebrow. "This is a board-controlled session, Mr. Kesh. Residents may submit commentary through official requests." "I've already submitted," I said, "to the state, multiple departments, but out of courtesy to the community, I'd like them to hear what's coming before it arrives by certified mail." A flicker of something passed through her eyes. Her voice stayed steady. "You're not authorized to—" I opened the binder and pulled out the printout of the video, still, the exact moment her hand gripped Naomi's wrap. The tear mid-frame, the fetal monitor visible, a timestamp across the bottom. I held it up. "This was recorded on my property, with devices legally installed and registered. The woman you assaulted was my wife, 7 months pregnant, wearing an FDA-listed maternity monitoring wrap prescribed by her doctor." Gasps, movement, one chair scraped back. "This is not about code compliance," I said. "This is about abuse of power, about personal bias masked as policy enforcement. And now it's under formal review by 3 regulatory bodies, including the licensing board that governs your authority. Sareth's expression didn't flinch, but her knuckles whitened where she gripped the podium. "Mr. Kesh," she said, icy now, "you are out of order." I reached into the binder again and produced Callum's signed affidavit. I read it aloud. The following citations were not lawfully voted on by the board, nor enacted with proper procedural transparency. Silence settled across the hall. When I finished, I looked at Marla. Her hands were in her lap. She didn't defend Sareth. She didn't speak at all. Sareth leaned forward. "If this is your attempt to unseat me, Mr. Kesh, you'll need more than slander and angry anecdotes." I took one last item from the binder, the formal DOPL confirmation letter. "This isn't an attempt," I said. "This is notification of an open misconduct case. Your license is under active investigation. You'll be hearing from the board, not this one, the state one." A beat of silence, then movement. Callum stood, slowly, and placed a folder of his own on the table. "Everything he said," he added, voice steady. "I back it." Someone clapped. It was faint, a nervous ripple, but it started something. A few others nodded. Marla stood too. She didn't speak, but she turned her body away from Sareth. She was isolating, losing control, and for the first time, the room didn't belong to her. Sareth didn't say another word that night. She stood motionless behind the podium, jaw set tight, eyes darting across the room like she was searching for an escape hatch that wasn't there. Her grip never left the podium edge, but her power had already slipped away. The room didn't move with her anymore. The moment Callum stood up, quietly, without drama, the spell was broken. Even the newer residents, the ones who used to nod along to every HOA bulletin she mailed, were now watching her like she was something cracked beneath clean paint. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to, because this wasn't about taking her down. It was about pulling the curtain back. I gathered my documents slowly, deliberately, and stepped out of the aisle. My footsteps echoed more than they should have. As I neared the front table, I placed a second folder, identical to the one submitted to DOPL, onto the community records desk. "This copy is for the residents," I said. "Any homeowner in Glenvale has the right to review board activity that affects their property, their families, or their well-being." No one argued, no one dared. Sareth stared at the folder like it might burn through the table. Behind me, a woman in her 30s raised her hand. It was Celia from the corner unit, the one who'd removed her solar lights after a sudden fine notice. "Is it true?" she asked. "Did you really file this with the state?" "Yes," I said, "with supporting evidence and witness testimony. Multiple departments are reviewing it." "Is she suspended?" "Not yet, but it's pending." The room rippled, not loud, not chaotic, but shifting. Sareth finally spoke, but the ice in her voice had melted into something brittle. "You're turning this neighborhood into chaos." "No," I said evenly. "You already did that. We're just putting it back in order." She stared at me for a long time, but I didn't blink. Then she turned sharply and walked out of the hall, leaving her papers behind. Her heels tapped once, twice, and faded. Callum stepped up to the front next. His face was pale but composed. "There will be an emergency board session this week," he said. "A motion for interim leadership until the investigation concludes." Someone clapped again, this time louder. Then someone else stood. It was Mrs. Venn. She'd brought a copy of her violation notice, the one where Sareth had claimed her bird feeder caused unpleasant view interruptions. She held it up without saying a word, and laid it next to mine. Celia followed, then a quiet man from the duplexes. One by one, they moved to the front of the room and placed their own small pieces of history on the table. Citations, photos, letters, documents they had once shoved into drawers or trash bins, now laid bare. By the time I left, the community records desk had become a collection of unspoken testimony, paper fragments of fear and frustration finally turned toward light. Outside, the sky was dark, but the porch lamps along Glenvale's paths glowed warmer than usual. Callum caught up with me at the sidewalk. "She'll fight this," he said. "You know that." "I'm counting on it," I replied. He exhaled and shook his head. "You should have been the one running this place. I never wanted the job. That's why you'd be good at it." We shook hands without saying goodbye. As I walked back to the house, I felt something unfamiliar settling in behind my ribs. Not pride, not relief, something quieter. Stability. Naomi was already at the door when I got home. She hadn't asked for updates, just held the door open as I walked inside. "You're quiet," she said. "It's quieter out there now." She smiled faintly. I felt it. I pulled the wind chime from its hook and brought it in for the night. Not out of fear, out of care. The house felt different, not just defended, centered. The walls didn't press in anymore. The floor felt solid again. Like the ground under us wasn't shifting anymore. It was settling. We were settling. And Sareth Vaughn had no idea how much was still coming. The suspension letter arrived 3 days later, delivered by certified mail, addressed to Sareth Vaughn, and copied to the Glenvale Summit HOA board. It was stamped with the seal of the Utah Department of Occupational and Professional Licensing. 2 pages long, unmistakable in its language, effective immediately. Temporary suspension of license pending full investigation. The terms were strict. No enforcement authority, no participation in board affairs, no HOA representation under her name or license during the review period. Callum forwarded me the scanned notice. The moment he'd received it, he had posted it, by regulation, on the HOA portal, and within an hour, the neighborhood was awake. Someone stapled a copy to the community bulletin board. By the time I stepped out for air, Naomi standing beside me with one hand on her stomach and the other gripping mine. The air outside felt different, lighter, clean. Sareth hadn't been seen since the meeting. Her car hadn't moved. Her porch light hadn't come on. The woman who once walked the street twice a day with her laminated badge and her clipboard had vanished behind her blinds. And the silence? This time, it didn't belong to her. It belonged to all of us. Naomi and I walked slowly down the main path, past the trimmed hedges and repainted fences Sareth once micromanaged. The houses looked the same, but the energy was different. Doors were open, windows no longer shuttered. 2 kids rode their bikes through the cul-de-sac, one of them wearing a compression vest with a superhero patch stitched on. No one stopped them, no one sighted them. And when we reached the park, something caught our eye. A chair, simple, folded, left out on the grass near the entrance. A slip of paper taped to it said, "Just sitting, not disrupting." We both laughed. In the distance, a few neighbors we barely knew waved toward us. Some nodded, some offered quiet, grateful smiles. None asked for details. They didn't need to. They had seen enough, heard enough, felt the shift. And even if Sareth returned, if somehow the investigation didn't end the way it should, she would never walk through this community the same way again. The blind obedience was gone. The silence was fractured. Callum stepped up beside us at the park gate, holding a clipboard. Not with citations, but with a petition. "We're voting her out," he said simply. "Before the state finishes, we're making it official. Interim elections start Monday." He handed me a pen. I signed. Naomi did too. We didn't say much on the walk back. We didn't need to. When we reached our porch, Naomi paused beneath the wind chime. It hadn't been touched since that night. Still, peaceful, whole. She looked up at it, then back at me. "You kept your promise." I nodded. "You shouldn't have to be brave just to live in your own home." We stood there together as the wind picked up, sending a soft cascade of notes through the bells. The sound wasn't loud, not disruptive, just present. A reminder of what was taken, of what we reclaimed, and of the power of choosing not to stay quiet, to anyone watching, anyone listening. Never underestimate how far one violation can reach. One touch, one torn shirt, one lie written with confidence in a clipboard. Because when that silence breaks, it echoes. Subscribe and don't miss the next one. Trust me, you'll feel it. And tell me in the comments, what injustice should we tackle next?